You have people like Paul Manafort with Russian connections running the campaign for Donald Trump. We have information, and the intel community has had information of connections between the Russians and members of Donald Trump's campaign at the very same time that the Russians are trying to fix the United States of America's election for president of the United States.
Yeah.
More than a few people tell me yesterday in making calls that that this includes much more than just a Christmas call between Flynn and the Russian ambassador. That it extends well into last summer.
This is a moment where of profound crisis, where the wheels in this administration 3.5 weeks in are very close to coming off the wagon.
Oh my goodness, these Morning Joe people are just in a tizzy today. The New York Times has a big report about. The New York Times has. You should have heard these people. This was classic MSNBC. And by the way, when more information comes out, they're going to have to walk a lot of this back. 855-40-LAURA, the New York Times headline that has Washington in an absolute meltdown because most of these people are headline readers. Trump campaign aides had repeated contacts with Russian intelligence. That sounds very nefarious. Sounds very concerning. And John Heilman at the end, the wheels are coming, they're going to come off. They're coming close to coming off. This is after, of course, the Mike Flynn resignation on Monday, which was really a request for a resignation by the White House. This is also after we learned that for some reason that eludes me and eludes most people, the Trump folks decided not to tell the Vice President of the United States that General Flynn had indeed in some way discussed sanctions with Russia, which in and of itself, who cares? Who cares if he discussed sanctions with Russia? But apparently he said to the Daily Caller yesterday that the conversation was basically the Russian ambassador might have said something like, well, you know, we're going to have to talk about these sanctions and other issues. And Flynn basically said, look, we're going to be reviewing all the policies when we get in. So, you know, I'm sure he's like blowing it off. This was after Barack Obama put in those late December additional sanctions against Russia, which included kicking a bunch of Russians out of the United States that they probably thought were involved in Russian intel. Now, we're going to dig deep into this story. We're going to talk to Eli Lake, who is a writer on national security affairs, who had a very interesting piece called The Political Assassination of Michael Flynn. I mentioned it on Special Report last night. And later on, we're going to talk to Dan Patrick, Lieutenant Governor of Texas. A lot of issues bubbling on the domestic front. When it comes to immigration, we'll talk to Dan. And then later on, Meg Meeker will join us. Fascinating story of what's been examined by pediatricians and the conditioning of children on the issue of transgenderism. So Dr. Meg Meeker is going to join us, and we'll talk about that. But we're going to dig into this story, and Eli will be with us in just a few moments. Think about this. The FBI and apparently the intelligence apparatus in the United States had intercepted at one point in time, as part of its routine surveillance of Russian and other foreign entities, had uncovered in conversations among Trump associates. We don't know who they are, except one of them, it looks like, is Paul Manafort. Other people mentioned in this piece are Roger Stone and Carter Page. Again, this part of it I don't see as confirmed. But as part of their normal, observation, surveillance of foreign entities, including the Russians, they came across intercepts that alarmed them. in part because, according to the New York Times, of the amount of contact that was occurring while Trump was speaking glowingly about the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. At one point last summer, Trump said at a campaign event that he hoped Russian intel services had stolen Hillary's emails and would make them public. He later said he was joking. The officials said the intercepted communications were not limited to Trump campaign officials. Got to read this carefully. And included other associates of Mr. Trump. On the Russian side, the contacts also included members of the government outside of the intelligence services, they said. Again, these are the people inside of the administration, outgoing administration, who are most, I imagine it would be outgoing, could be people who are still there, leaking classified information to the New York Times. Most of them probably don't like Trump very much, probably nefarious motives, but nevertheless, we'll tell you what is reported here. All of the current and formal officials who spoke to, see, some of them are former, some of them are current, spoke on the condition of anonymity because of the continuing investigation and the fact that it's classified. The official said that one of the advisors picked up on the calls was Paul Manafort, who was Trump's campaign chairman for several months last year and had worked as a political consultant in Ukraine. The officials declined to identify the other Trump associates on the calls. So Manafort could be the campaign official, and then the other three could be just people like Roger Stone, others who know Trump. The call logs and intercepted communications are part of a larger trove of information that the FBI is sifting through as it investigates the links, and I would say the links or alleged links, between Mr. Trump's associates and the Russian government. I remember associates. Who are associates? People who visited him in his office, people who know him from years ago, as well as the hacking of the DNC, according to federal law enforcement officials. As part of its inquiry, the FBI has obtained banking and travel records and conducted interviews, according to these anonymous officials. Mr. Manafort, who has not been charged with any crimes, dismissed the official's account in a telephone interview on Tuesday. So a man who apparently doesn't think he has anything to worry about answered questions from the media on the phone yesterday and said, "This is absurd. I have no idea what this is referring to. I have never knowingly spoken to Russian intel officers. I've never been involved with anything to do with the Russian government or the Putin administration or any other issues under investigation today, period." That's his response yesterday on the record. He added, quote, "It's not like these people wear badges that say, quote, I'm a Russian intel officer." And what he's referring to, of course, is the fact that just like with our CIA, they usually have a cover. So the cover, you work for the CIA as an agent, your cover could be you're an exporter or something like that. So, you know, a lot of times the intel operatives operate just as regular business people, and they try to make their way into various business relationships in order to get info on people. Several of Mr. Trump's associates, like Mr. Manafort, have done business in Russia. Big deal. So has major real estate firms, commercial real estate firms, and other banks all across the world have done business in Russia. I continue. And it is not unusual for American businessmen to come in contact with foreign intel officials, sometimes unwittingly, in countries like Russia and Ukraine, where the spy services are deeply embedded in society. Law enforcement officials did not say to what extent the contacts might be about business. See, that jumps out of this article for me. You know what I can imagine? This is what I can imagine happen. Whether you're maybe you're at an investment conference, or maybe you're doing some consulting in Ukraine on something, and you're in a room with someone else who's, oh yeah, I work in Russia, I'm a Russian, I work for this bank, or I work. Oh, really? Yeah, I do this stuff for Ukraine. Oh, really? We should keep an open line of communication. Maybe we can work together in the future. Oh, okay, that would be good. I have no idea what happened, but in this reporting, as the New York Times must conclude on paragraph 3, the officials interviewed in recent weeks said that so far they had seen no evidence of such cooperation between Russia and the Trump campaign, no collusion on hacking or other efforts to influence the election. But that headline is a grabber, isn't it? That grabs your attention. The officials would not disclose many details to the New York Times, including what was discussed on the calls. Business. The identity of the Russian intelligence officials who participated, and how many of Mr. Trump's advisors were talking to the Russians. It is also unclear whether the conversations had anything to do. This is the thing that should be highlighted here. If I'm bold-facing for the Laura Ingraham show, I'm bold-facing this line. It is also unclear whether the conversations had anything to do with Mr. Trump himself. Do you see how ridiculous this becomes the more you read this? But to listen to these people on MSNBC, this is Watergate times 10. No, this is Watergate times infinity. The intercepted calls are different from the wiretap conversations last year between Flynn, Mr. Trump's former national security advisor, and Sergei Kislyak, Russia's ambassador to the United States. In those calls, which led to Mr. Flynn's resignation, the two men discussed sanctions that the Obama administration imposed on Russia in December. Remember, when they say discussed, what it looks like it should say is mentioned. To this moment, I do not believe that Mike Flynn was on a call with Sergei Kislyak, or whatever his name is, Kislyak, and said, hey, we're going to lift sanctions. When Trump gets in, we really like you guys, so we're going to get in there. We're going to lift all these sanctions because we've said things about you that aren't terribly antagonistic, and you've said some things about him. So let us get in there, and then we're going to lift all the sanctions. I just don't believe that happened. I don't believe that happened. I believe that this story needs a lot more context, a lot more transparency and openness, both from the Trump people, who should, at some point, I think they should reveal what was discussed in this call. Apparently, Mike Flynn was not even able to look at the transcript of his own conversation, was not able to defend himself publicly because the Trump administration said, no, you can't say anything last week. Was not able to do that. He couldn't even defend himself, except in his resignation letter. 855-40-LAURA. The FBI, maybe the other intelligence agencies, imagine the defense, maybe the DNI or the DIA. Then it got over to the Justice Department with Sally Yates. All these people leaking. Is that the only story here? No, it isn't. I'd like to know why Mike Pence wasn't told about this. That's my concern. That's my major concern right now. All this other stuff, I don't think it amounts to much. I really don't. Nothing I see in here makes me think, Trump was colluding with the Russians. I just don't see it. Maybe we'll learn more, but before people are going to go to the highest level of the DEFCON meter, I think they should take a breath and actually carefully read the facts of what we know today and what we do not know. 855-40-LAURA. Eli Lake is going to join us in just a moment. We're going to have him on for 2 segments, and also Dan Patrick's going to join us, Lieutenant Governor of Texas. Don't go away.
He's a bad businessman, does his business while he can.
Okay, you want to keep your favorite podcasts like this one free to download, right? Well, then all you have to do is complete a short, anonymous survey, which takes less than 5 minutes. Just go to podcastone.com/mysurvey to answer the questions. You can also get there by clicking the banner at podcastone.com. If you've done this in the past, we'd like to thank you, but we do need you to do it again because we want to make sure we're giving you what you want. That's podcastone.com/mysurvey or click the banner at podcastone.com.
How disheartening it was to see several people on the Hill and some editorial writers say this isn't about the Russian connections.
Yeah.
This is about leaks.
You are listening to the Laura Ingraham Show. Joining us now, Eli Lake. His piece, which I cited on Special Report last night, The Political Assassination of Michael Flynn, and he joins us now. Eli, it's great to talk to you. We're going to get you to react to the news overnight in the New York Times. But your point in this piece is not that the Trump team, got everything right, but that the conclusion from all these people on television is that Michael Flynn lied. You say that might not be even the case. Why?
Well, how can we judge,
exactly what happened if we haven't seen these transcripts. And I just would warn, first of all, these are selectively being described, these monitored phone calls. I have heard that you could read it different ways. And by the way, the New York Times and the Washington Post also reported that in their stories. And also, the description of how it was described to me was there was a phone call. There were phone calls between the Russian ambassador and Mike Flynn when he was preparing to be the national security advisor in the transition period, which is normal. And Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, brings up, what about these sanctions? And Flynn says, we're coming in a few weeks. We're going to be looking at all Russia policy. Let's cool out for now, pretty much. So how is that sinister? How would that, if it was an offhand part of the conversation and it was mainly about something else, can he be forgiven for not remembering it when he's talking, has dozens of phone calls a day with various foreign dignitaries and he's being briefed? I think that that's reasonable. But note that the way that this whole thing was framed was Flynn was he was deceiving, he was deceptive, he was keeping this from his colleagues and so forth. I don't know. That may be true. We haven't seen all of these details, and we may never see them.
But don't you think it's interesting, Eli? Sorry to interrupt. We're going to hold you over to the next segment, too. Don't you think it's interesting that they didn't allow him to see the transcript of his own call, and nor did they allow him to defend himself over the last weekend, which I find very strange.
Extraordinary.
He's not allowed to defend himself? He thinks he maintains that he did not lie. He didn't discuss sanctions. They were mentioned by I've met that ambassador at a party years ago. He's a big talker, that guy. He's a big talker. And he goes on and on and on. I don't deny at all that he might have said that, but it wasn't discussed in this fulsome nature that everybody's implying happened.
I think the whole thing, it just smells like a setup. Now, maybe there's something else here. There were other contacts during the campaign, all of these allegations. I would just say, usually, when you have a major politicized investigation like this and you're getting drips and drabs, a lot of times what we think we know and the press thinks it knows is wrong. Remember Scooter Libby? Remember we thought Scooter Libby leaked Valerie Plame's identity? It was a certainty, and then we find out it was Dick Armitage, Colin Powell's deputy, the bureaucratic rival of Vice President Cheney. It was the other team in the Bush administration that did it. So we had 2 years of Libby did it. He outed a CIA officer, and it turned out he didn't. So I'm really skeptical. That was a lesson for me as a journalist. Right. When that was happening, I said, wait a second, sometimes the things we think we know about these ongoing investigations, and
their political motivations for a lot of this as well. We're going to continue with Eli Lake. He's going to chime in on this new New York Times report about campaign aides with repeated contacts to Russian intelligence. What do we know and what we don't know is just as important. Don't go away. Wasn't it easier back in the 80s? Doesn't this song bring you back? Things were simpler then. We just had the Soviet Union and the United States and the Cold War. Now we have Putin and the New York Times, Donald Trump. Oh, my goodness. In just a moment, we're going to talk to Dan Patrick, Lieutenant Governor of the great state of Texas. We'll close it out with Eli Lake. Remember the extended vehicle service protection from Car Shield. So speaking of cars, your car goes out of warranty and then you blow your transmission, forget about it. You're out like $3,000 to $4,000. It's a nightmare. So Car Shield's great. They've processed now over $2 billion in claims. And they have a great system because you're not out of pocket. You get your mechanic, ASE certified mechanic or dealer. And Car Shield, once you're a member, they pay them directly. And you also get 24/7 roadside in a rental car where yours is in the shop. So that's all cool. If your car is between 3 and 12 years old, you could become a member of Car Shield like I am. My SUV is, I think, 2009 now, so I'm out of warranty, but I'm a member of Car Shield. Just call them at Car Shield at 800-465-7040. That's 800-465-7040 or carshield.com. Use that promo code Laura, and you'll save 10%. Again, carshield.com, promo code Laura.
This obviously begs a lot of questions. about whether those conversations between Flynn and the Russian ambassador were sanctioned by the president himself or others in the administration, whether they were knowing of those conversations, and why those who were knowing did nothing to correct the record. All of this merits investigation.
This is a cover-up without a crime. There is nothing wrong with an incoming national security advisor talking with the Russians, talking about sanctions with the Russians. It's not illegal. It's not improper.
Oh my gosh. Now the national security advisor, incoming, cannot speak to his foreign counterparts. Can't do it. Can't speak. Can't have a conversation. And that's I believe that's Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut, who, of course, the Democrats want to take advantage of this. The never-Trumpers want to take advantage of this. We've got to have an investigation. And meanwhile, Eli Lake is asking some great questions about this New York Times report about the Trump campaign aides had repeated contacts with Russian intel. And Eli, you're kind enough to hold over with us because you're very concerned about the atmosphere of political assassination. That it seems like that's what we're in Washington right now. I mean, it's always like this, death by 1,000 leaks. But I don't think the New York Times would like it if their conversations with foreign government officials, their reporters' conversations, were released to the public, given what we know about some of the reporters and their coverage over recent years. But apparently, the U.S. government can pick its targets and then selectively release classified information, which, by the way, is a felony.
Well, I can tell you, New York Times, also some of my own communications with Hillary Clinton and State Department employees were released as part of
WikiLeaks.
The various WikiLeaks and also the State Department's own kind of email dump. So I didn't like that.
Right, but it's not the U.S. government doing it. That was a
Right,
foreign
not the US
entity
government.
dropping on it. When we become a mini police state where the government can be used against and until charged with something, innocent people to selectively release classified information, I think we have a lot of problems on our hands. And it looks like these are a lot of outgoing Obama administration officials. And Rush said this yesterday. Drudge was reporting it. Like, what did Obama know and when did he know it?
Well, right, and it's also it's extraordinary in the sense that, as I pointed out, monitored communications like the Flynn ambassador phone call is almost never discussed with reporters. That's the most sensitive stuff, and there's a reason for that because the government can do a lot of phone tapping, they can do a lot of eavesdropping, and we trust them to do that. But part of that trust is that they don't use that information to leak it selectively to influence our politics. I can't think of a more political act than leaking these, the evidence of these phone calls and contradicting them and everything like that, forcing the resignation of, a president's national security advisor less than a month into his presidency. That's extraordinary. Never happened before.
Where do you think this ends up? Your best guess right now.
I'm going to be blunt here, and I mean, I was not a pro-Trump columnist by any stretch, but I think that he may have just sowed the seeds of the Trump administration's demise because they just got Flynn, and that is, the blood is in the water, and, who's next? Because it's not going to end with just Flynn, and it's not going to just be limited, to Manafort and Page and Stone, who are the subject of the New York Times story. And I should say, please, the FBI should investigate this professionally. When they have a case, they should bring it before a judge, and they should prosecute. That's how it's supposed to work. You're not supposed to try people in the press like this. When it happened in the 1950s, we called it McCarthyism. When J. Edgar Hoover did it, liberals were correctly outraged by the power of the permanent state to influence and at times blackmail elected politicians. So what do we shouldn't be going down that road. Mm-hmm. Ironic that this is happening at a time from the opponents of someone that the left is basically kind of creeping in.
But they want to impeach Trump. They want to impeach Trump. I mean, let's face it. Well, I mean, they want to impeach Trump. This is what they've always wanted. They want to say that the Trump's behavior and connection with Russia is so outside the bounds of normalcy and decency and maybe even legality, that he's got to go. I mean, that's what they want. And maybe this reporting just ultimately raises questions about credibility and legitimacy. So anything Trump does now on foreign policy is tainted. But they want to impeach Trump. That's what they want. And Trump's got to be really smart in the way he responds to allegations and the way they handle this matter. And I don't know why they didn't. I'm going to ask Dan Patrick about this, who's been around for a long time and in following this. And as Lieutenant Governor of Texas, he must just be scratching his head. But why didn't they tell Pence about this? That to me is disturbing. Eli, before we let you go, 15 seconds. Why do you think they didn't tell Pence?
I don't know why they did not tell Pence, but it's like, why didn't they let Flynn see the transcripts, right? I mean, it's like there's a lot of weird things here, and I think they made a huge error in this.
You know, Eli Lake and writes for Bloomberg, and he's terrific, and he's not a partisan on this. He's not a pro-Trump, anti-Trump. He's just like, look at the facts. I appreciate it, Eli. Thanks so much. Joining us now in studio, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, 42nd Lieutenant Governor of Texas, a longtime friend of mine personally, and he was former Texas chairman for Trump, the presidential campaign. He's going to talk about border enforcement, what's happening in the state of Texas, sanctuary cities, and the like. And before we get into that, Dan, just welcome to my studio. You haven't been here.
I love this new studio. I was at the other studio last year, I guess it was, when we were talking if Cruz and Trump would come together. Remember that discussion?
I always wanted them to come together, and they didn't listen to me, and even at the convention.
Well, I was with Cruz at that point. I was his chair in Texas, then joined the Trump campaign. And, here's a president who is, I think, working to get his footing, surrounded by a lot of people working to get their footing under tremendous pressure,
right?
Not only by his opponents, but his supporters to act quickly. I look at the leaving of Flynn. I think someone like Michael McCall, who I think was being considered for Homeland Security, might be a perfect pick for a national security advisor, because he needs, I think, to bring in some people with some experience and credibility. And Michael McCall, chair of that committee. Of course, he's from Texas, and it would be great for Texas. But I think Michael would be a great pick to kind of settle into that position. Trump's doing everything he said he was going to do, and he's learning that, he needs a little bit more follow-up and a little bit more preparation before he does it, like the ban. But he's doing everything. Have you ever seen
anything like this?
I've never seen anything like it.
Anything like the blood in the water mentality with it. There's no allowing investigations to continue. There's no sense of just take a breath. Let's see what we really have here. They want to kill this guy. They want to kill him off politically. And he shouldn't help them, that's for sure. But this is a fever pitch. This thing has reached in just 3.5 weeks.
We're seeing the left exposed, like we all knew they were. They really want to tear down the country. They're willing to do anything to do it, including tearing down this president. I was thinking, just driving over to the studio, if you wore a Trump shirt down the street today, or a Trump hat, you may be accosted. That's a terrible time in America when we have a new president where you can't even wear a shirt or a hat with his name on it without ridiculous. Someone being ugly and nasty to you. It's dangerous for our country. We didn't like Obama on the right, but we didn't. Were there some bad actors that said some things they shouldn't have said? Of course.
Right, but we didn't prevent him from speaking, or literally try to prevent him from speaking, or one of his cabinet officials from speaking.
I'm finding in Texas for the first time, and I've been in public office now for going on 11 years, we're now seeing protesters at events that I never saw before. Soros is funding. These are coming to our committees, using the F word in committees.
It's
just awful. It's ugly. It's disgusting. And Trump just needs to keep focused and keep going down the path of doing the things he said he would do, and the people will be with him.
Can you tell us what the status is now in Texas with sanctuary cities such as Austin and the state of Texas? We all love Austin. It's capital, beautiful place, great growth. But clearly there is a disconnect between the mentality in Austin and the mentality and the governance of the state when it comes to immigration and enforcement.
Rick Perry used to call Austin the blueberry in the bowl of tomato soup because we're a very conservative state. We have a sheriff, just yesterday is a great example, in Travis County, where Austin is, who was ready to let someone go who ICE had asked to detain her on. because this person didn't meet her criteria, this new sheriff, who's not a law enforcement officer, in my view, just a leftist socialist ideologue. And this person that they finally decided to hold at the last minute had sexually assaulted young girls multiple times. She was ready to let that person go because it didn't meet her criteria. Now, she found out that it was a more serious crime. I don't know what her criteria was that she was going to let him go. The point is, you don't have a criteria if you're in law enforcement. You follow federal law. When ICE says hold someone, you don't say, well, let me check to see if this person fits my list.
No, it's supposed to be,
You're supposed to be
a federal oversight. We're going to take a break. We're going to continue.
Sure.
Texas on the front lines of border enforcement and has been doing it as a state without much federal help in some areas. We'll talk about that and a lot more. Dan Patrick, Lieutenant Governor of the great state of Texas, along with Greg Abbott, has been doing a fantastic job there. We're going to take a break. Don't go away. So Paul Ryan and other top Hill Republicans are visiting the Texas-Mexico border next week. They didn't invite me, Dan Patrick, Lieutenant Governor of Texas, is with us, who's pushing Michael McCaul as a national security advisor earlier. People are tweeting that out already. I don't think he's in the top 3 of their consideration.
Well, I'm just saying I think he should be.
Okay, well,
I think he should be.
Yeah,
he would bring a lot of credibility to the team.
He's more of an establishment guy.
But he's done a great job. He's done a great job at Homeland Security.
He and I have tangled on immigration before. Remember on the business wants all this labor coming in, but that's okay. I think he's an interesting choice. Let's talk about specifically what you guys are doing on sanctuary policies. We talked about Austin, but what teeth can you put in your sanctuary city bill that's now working its way through the legislature?
We just began session in January.
Yep.
We've already fast-tracked Senate Bill 4,
Yep.
which is our sanctuary city bill that says if you do not follow federal law, we will take state funding away, you will be subject to civil lawsuits and criminal penalties. And let me tell you, we're not going to mess around with this, Laura.
Don't mess with Texas.
Don't mess with Texas. This sheriff in Travis County.
She is an outrage.
She is an outrage, and
work for
under
Planned
her
Parenthood.
list, bank robbers could even get out. You know, it wouldn't be held because she doesn't think that's serious enough.
They're people too, Dan.
But listen to these crime statistics, Laura. Since June of 2011, just in Texas through January, in Texas we have booked into our jails 212,000 criminal aliens. We've charged them with 566,000 crimes, including 1,143 murders, 6,001 sexual assaults, 67,513 assaults, 67,212 drug charges, over 8,000 gun charges. I mean, this is just Texas, 5.5 years. 566,000 crimes by criminal aliens. That's Department of Homeland Security statistics, even under Obama. And so when they talk about they're rounding up people, you know, innocently catching people
This
in the
is my
net,
response. It's about time.
It's about time. And will some people get caught up in the net? Sure. If you have any police raid in any neighborhood, you know, there's always going to be someone.
There's like one dreamer who got picked up yesterday. You might as well thought it was a hate crime. One dreamer gets picked up. Oh, dreamer got picked up. Oh gosh, please.
So and the reason we need the wall, and I'm glad Ryan's coming down. We've spent we put $800 million in our budget this year. $800 million in our budget the last time. I increased that as lieutenant governor from $250 million because of the issue was so difficult. But we need a wall because when we catch them and send these criminals back, they're just coming back. How many times do you see the stories?
Oh, 5 times departed.
So we have to have the wall. Big walls around big cities, electronic walls are there, natural barriers. We have to keep the criminals, the drugs, and the terrorists out.
Dan, your Bill 6, SB 6.
Texas Privacy Act.
Yeah, Texas Privacy Act. It says that requires all those people to use the bathroom that identifies with the sex on his or her birth certificate, facing public scrutiny. The NFL has come out and said, we'll pull all of our Super Bowl or playoff games out of Texas. What do you say to NFL?
Well, I say what Greg Abbott said yesterday. The NFL needs to get out of politics. They need to stick to their business. Does Roger Goodell, who didn't care about people not respecting the national anthem, who took a while to come down on domestic violence, does he support boys and girls showering together in the 10th grade? Is that what the NFL is for? And by the way, if he says it's a threat that if we have any bill that keeps men out of ladies' rooms or boys and girls from showering together in the 10th grade, which our bill does, because we have to, because we have school districts that actually have said boys and girls can shower together in high school.
Lovely.
And so our bill says no government can tell business what to do. We're a free enterprise state. If a business wants to be as stupid as Target and run off their business and see their stock drop 25%, let them do it. We say that no school can have a policy that boys and girls share showers, locker rooms, and bathrooms. So the NFL thinks that's discriminatory.
It's madness.
If Roger Goodell is worried about our bill, then why doesn't he announce that next season every stadium in the NFL is going to allow men in the ladies' room? I don't think that would fly with any of the NFL owners. The NFL needs just to stand on the sideline and not tell states what their public policy is.
Don't mess with Texas. I'm telling you, NFL, and they have enough problems. They've lost viewership and lost revenue this year. Dan Patrick, we wish you all the best. Please keep in touch with us, Lieutenant Governor of the great
Always
state
good
of
to be with
Texas and friend.
Your healthy radio addiction starts now.
Power to the people!
The Laura Ingraham Show.
Flynn was secretly communicating with Russian officials. At the same time, Russia was attacking our democracy. We have no idea why Flynn was doing all of this and why he was trying desperately to help Russia.
With respect to Michael Flynn talking to other governments in the transition, that's his job. That's what he's supposed to be doing. So it's entirely appropriate. It's actually the job description for incoming national security advisors to talk to other nations, to talk to ambassadors, to start beginning relationships. That's very much appropriate.
You are listening to the Laura Ingraham Show, 855-40-LAURA. Paul Ryan is exactly right. It's entirely appropriate, and I would say it would be a real dereliction of duty if Michael Flynn hadn't talked to his counterparts in major countries across the globe. And in fact, he did. And the New York Times going crazy over these leaked reports of supposed conversations among Trump associates and people who were Russian intel agents, yet at the same time saying there's no sense that there was any collusion between the Trump campaign, no evidence of that, and Russia, nor is there evidence that any of these conversations even involved Donald Trump, even mentioned Donald Trump, that this was even related to Donald Trump. But this is the way Washington works, and there's blood in the water. And you got Karl Rove on Fox talking about it now. We'll dip into that coverage in just a moment. He's being interviewed by Bill Hemmer on what this disarray in the West Wing is all about and the dangers of having a West Wing in disarray.
The president was elected by people who wanted to have the economy improved, jobs created, and paychecks grow. And the image that we have this in the fourth week of the administration has little to nothing to do with the economy. The narrative, the control of the narrative is being lost by the White House. Despite the fact the president's doing good things.
Business leaders, you got to keep
the focus on those business leaders and not on tweets about Meryl Streep or unnecessary conflicts.
The final point, though, you started to say these leaks are disturbing. You can't have Americans spying on other Americans and expect that information to go public, right?
No, and I think Senator Burr, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, whom you just had some footage of, was absolutely right. The release of this information will to professionals on the other side to give them clues as to our sources and methods of intelligence. And
that's a great point.
This is political payback, in my opinion, either by people who served in the Obama administration or by intelligence community officials who are upset about the comments that the president-elect made before he got sworn in. But that's revenge, and that has no role in our system and could be poisonous to the relationship between the president and the intelligence community.
Yeah, and I agree with Karl Rove completely. It's the political assassination of Michael Flynn. I think Eli Lake's column on this is exactly right. Why would they not allow Michael Flynn to defend himself? If you have any concern of criminal wrongdoing, number one, you don't want to talk publicly. Apparently, he wanted to speak publicly about this last week. He wanted to be able to defend himself. He said, let me look at the transcript. They wouldn't let him. Why? See, that's bad management of a potential crisis. So maybe in the West Wing, there needs to be a reorientation of how things are organized and how decisions are made. To me, a lot of these problems have gone back to messaging, organization, and experience. None of these people have any experience in government. Bannon doesn't. Trump doesn't. Priebus was at the RNC. That ain't government. Don McGahn, the White House counsel, never done anything like this. He's a compliance attorney. And he's a very good guy and he's a smart guy, but he's never done anything like this. No experience in government. And yet they're coming at you. We have FBI intercepts that say something. Sally Yates is running over from the Justice Department as an acting attorney general on January 23rd, I believe. I think that's the date, or 28th. 23rd, she's running over there and saying, oh, we might have blackmail information. There might be blackmail material against Michael Flynn. And so she goes to talk to McGahn. McGahn goes over to Trump, says, this is what this Sally Yates is saying. You know, we've looked at the transcripts. Apparently he looked at the transcripts. And they determined there's nothing wrong with what Flynn said. We don't see any legal problem with this. And then it was not until February 9th that Mike Pence was informed about this, informed about the fact that Flynn might have, the issue of sanctions might have been raised, but I maintain not discussed, but raised. Something can be raised in a conversation. Look, I want to get into that. I want to get into that, I don't know, that business deal you advised me on in L.A. that went south. And I say, well, yeah, we can talk about that at some other point. I can't get to that for a couple of weeks. That's not discussing it. That means the issue was raised. That's what if I had to bet right now, that's what I bet happened with the Russian ambassador. That's what I believe happened. I have, again, no inside information, but knowing Flynn, he's not an idiot. He would not want to go out and defend himself if he wasn't completely confident that he did not start bargaining away issues on sanctions, which technically would be a violation of the Logan Act, although even on that score, it's never been used to prosecute anybody. So I think you can say on multiple levels, Flynn did nothing wrong, except maybe he forgot to, and he said it was inadvertent. I'm taking him at his word till we know something different. That it was mentioned, but it wasn't discussed. He probably should have said, or remembered in the 50 phone calls he had, that the Russian ambassador mentioned, we got to talk. We must talk about many things, including the sanctions issue. So that's where things are going.
What did General Flynn say to the Russian ambassador about lifting sanctions? Did he say anything at all, or is this just being spun by the media? So I think Congress needs to be informed of what actually General Flynn said to the Russian ambassador about lifting sanctions. And I want to know, did General Flynn do this by himself, or was directed by somebody to do it?
Okay, so of course Lindsey Graham wants to pile on Trump. I mean, you should just go down the list of never Trumpers and get their comments on what they're saying now with the information they have on the New York Times. That's what they should do. They just go through the list. What is Jeff Flake saying today? What is Lindsey Graham? What is John McCain saying? Who else is on the list of the never Trumpers? And that Adam Kinzinger. He's another one who didn't like Trump. He's a big neoconservative. He hates Trump. He's another one. Oh, these are disturbing issues, disturbing questions. So, and John McCain, he did speak out at some point yesterday, didn't he? He made a statement. Oh, his statement. Yeah, the Flynn resignation shows Trump administration's dysfunction on security, raises questions about Russia. He went on to say, at the same time, General Flynn is a troubling indication of dysfunction of the current national security apparatus as our nation confronts the most complex and diverse array of global challenges since the end of World War II. Let me say one thing. You could count on one hand the number of times John McCain has been right on any major national security issue. I mean, God bless him. He's an American hero, but I mean, this is the guy who said we should give money to these or arm these rebels. As far as I can tell, the rebels that he was asking us to arm were turning around and shooting our men or our special ops in Syria. So what the heck does he know? General Flynn's resignation also raises further questions about the Trump administration's intentions toward Putin's Russia, including statements by the president suggesting moral equivalence between the U.S. and Russia. You're listening to the Laura Ingraham Show, 855-40-LAURA. This will be Lindsey Graham's moment in the sun, because anytime the media can use a Trump critic to bash Trump, and especially if it's a Republican, McCain and Graham will become the two favorites of the booking producers over at MSNBC and CNN. Favorites to book over the next week. But this means the Trump people have to be really, really smart. And I agree with what we heard from both Eli Lake and what Karl Rove said just now. Again, Karl Rove doesn't love Trump. That's an obvious. But that this was a political hit job on Flynn. It stinks to high heaven. The fact that they didn't let him defend himself, the fact that it's not clear at all that he lied about anything. No one's demonstrated anywhere where he's actually willfully lied. He said they didn't discuss sanctions. There's no indication, there's no transcript release that said sanctions were discussed. Could have been mentioned as, please help us get through these sanctions. They're very inconvenient to Russia. And then he says, okay, well, we'll talk about this later. We're going to be in 2 weeks. We'll have a new review of all this. I hope you help us on this. This is not good for Mother Russia. I mean, that could have happened. That's not discussing sanctions. That's putting it off for another day. 855-40-LAURA. We'll get to this. Your calls. The folks at MSNBC basically call this Watergate times infinity. And New York Times has to admit in its reporting that no clue that there was ever any conversations about Trump with these associates, interactions with Russian officials, and also no indication at all in the intercepts or in the monitoring that there was any collusion between Trump's associates, whoever those are, and the Russian government. But it sounds good to put it in a headline, doesn't it? We'll take a break. 855-40-LAURA. Get to all your calls. A lot more coming up.
Oh, just let your love flow like a mountain stream and let your love grow.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are in a fight for the soul of our democracy. The question is whether we will clearly understand that this is our watch.
The tweet of General Flynn today was scapegoat. So the inference to be drawn from his statement is that other people have blame that should be shared in all of this.
My Democrat colleagues have amnesia. I will say this, they are very well rested because for 8 years they didn't lift a finger to do oversight. So all that energy you saw today at their press conference, that's because they went on an 8-year-long vacation from doing oversight over the executive branch.
Trey Gowdy, one of the best of the best, reacting to all the hysteria. Let's go to Pam on line 3. Pammy. Go ahead, Pam.
Hello?
Hey, Pam, go ahead.
Hi. I was just telling your caller that I am so sick of this fighting and just a continuation of the same garbage there in D.C. and the fighting and talking about everything except what they should be talking about, jobs and the economy and everything. It's just such a turnoff. I can't even hardly watch the news anymore.
No, I completely agree. It's on every station. Other friends of mine are doing the same thing. They're just tuning it out. They're much more interested in hearing what the governors are doing on the local level, the state level, to shore up their economies, to fight back against these leftist ideologues, politically correct nightmares who are trying to, either poison or pollute the atmosphere in our public schools or choke off business development and the crazy environmentalists. So, look, I think there's a lot of great stuff happening on the state front. And I think when you look at the real policies already that Trump has put into place, they're really good. But I think Karl Rove's point is a good one, and I've said this, it's not like he's saying anything new, that you must hold your narrative. You must hold on to your narrative. Don't let your narrative slip through your fingers and let the other people define who you are. Yeah, that's why your communications team is so important. Yeah, language must be used carefully. There can be no series of verbal slip-ups or mistakes or inadvertent untruths said to the public. You can't have that. Everyone makes mistakes, but it can't be a series of missteps where one person is saying one thing, then the other person goes out an hour later and it's a 180-degree difference. You can't do that. You have to lock down your messaging operation. When I say lock down, I don't mean it in a nefarious way. I mean you have to have a consistency of message that reflects the reality of what the policy is. And things will be better. But it can't be the shoot from the hip. One person walks into the Oval and comes out saying something. Another person gets a briefing with another aide and comes out and says something else. You know what I would do? I'd take a moratorium on television for a while. I would not go on TV through the weekend. I'd reset to Monday. That's what I would do. No interviews until Monday. You can do some print interviews if you want, but I would stop the television interviews. Bob Corker chiming in on this Russia, Trump, Flynn issue. Let's listen.
Most of that and do it well.
President Trump tweeted today, quote, "The real story here is why are there so many illegal leaks coming out of Washington? Will these leaks be happening as I deal on North Korea, etc.?" Do you agree?
I'm stunned at the number of leaks that are coming out of the White House. And, of course, that's something they can deal with internally. But, yeah, it's been amazing to me that in 8 years during the Obama administration, I mean, it was a tight ship. Very few leaks came out. And yet during the first few weeks here, it seemed like every day there's some new leak. So
this is where we wonder whether we live in a police state or we live in the United States, where the surveillance apparatus, working in concert with investigators at the FBI and political hacks that used to work for Obama, hang on to power as long as they can, and in the process, in the meantime, they selectively leak dribs and drabs of information that is incomplete to the New York Times, which they know will frame it in the worst possible way for Trump. They know the New York Times will be compliant in doing that. And that's exactly what the New York Times did. Unbelievable turmoil. Trump's first month leaves Washington reeling. Michael Shear's piece today. John McCain, Republican of Arizona, railed against the administration, decrying the dysfunction. Then there's a paragraph that goes like this. The president angrily provoked the cancellation of a summit meeting with the Mexican president, hung up on the Australia's prime minister, authorized a commando raid that resulted in the death of the Navy SEAL, repeatedly lied about the existence of millions of fraud votes, da-da-da-da-da. His words and actions have generated almost daily protests around the country. Some of these pieces read more like a column than a real reporting. Still, half of the president's cabinet has yet to be confirmed. And several other key White House aides have become lightning rods for daily mockery by late-night comedians. Well, that's because the late-night comedians are liberal. They had plenty of material with Obama and his czars and Pelosi and her big gavel when she was House Speaker. There are plenty of material that I did on my show daily with Obama. Obama's 59 states comment, Joe Biden telling a disabled man to stand up. I mean, there are all sorts of things that were funny that they didn't mock because they agreed with Obama. Well, now they hate Trump. They hate Trump's agenda. They hate populism. They hate economic nationalism. And so every moment of every show will be geared toward caricaturing the Trump administration as incompetent, dysfunctional, filled with a bunch of people who just want to be on TV, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is what they'll do. I know it. Many of you know it. Let's let's go to Jody in Arizona on line 3. John McCain enjoying his moment of he has a "see I told you so" kind of look on his face, doesn't he, McCain? Jody, go ahead.
Oh, yes, Laura. I'm like your previous caller. I'm so sick of it. I'm don't even want to watch even Fox News anymore because I'm just so tired of it. But the one thing that I think we out here can do, and I call my senators and my congressmen every week, and I say, do your job. Get going. I tell them 17 or 16 people like you ran. The guy that won wasn't like you. He wasn't establishment.
Yeah, well, I think they want an establishment voice in that West Wing, and they want that establishment voice now.
Hey, it's Jordan Harbinger. For the last 10 years, I've successfully helped people build their self-confidence with my Art of Charm podcast. And now, along with Art of Charm, I'm hosting a new show. It's Podcast One's latest program, The Forbes List. On the show, we talk to the Forbes editors that curate their famous and respected lists, like self-made richest people, billionaires, and highest-paid athletes. We'll get behind-the-scenes insight and information that doesn't make the print cut. It launches this week on February 16th, so please subscribe on iTunes to the Forbes list, and don't forget to rate us, review, and share.
God's gonna blow your clouds away.
Remember when you first moved into your house and your home and you had all these ideas about how to fix it up? Well, this President's Day weekend, you can cross a project off your list with Select Blind's amazing sale on high-quality blinds, shades, and shutters also. With Select Blind's do-it-yourself, it doesn't have to mean do it alone. I'm telling you, if you can hang a picture, you can hang your own blinds. And for the added peace of mind, their specialists will walk you through how to measure, choose, and install your new window coverings, and then you can get back to the important stuff like maybe relaxing a little this President's Day weekend. Select Blinds puts their customers first. You can just check out all the 170,000 five-star reviews on their site. SelectBlinds.com it's the simple and smart way to get blinds. So shop the President's Day sale today at SelectBlinds.com for amazing deals on blinds, shades, and shutters. Mention the Laura Ingraham Show at checkout, and you get sample swatches of the room darkening blinds or shades of your choice, absolutely free, at SelectBlinds.com.
Republicans and editorial writers cannot be so stupid as to pretend that they just picked on poor Michael Flynn out of nowhere. No. Michael Flynn, a man who visited Russia, had dinner with Putin, was believed to have received payments from Russia. Do you think they would have done this to Rex Tillerson? No, they wouldn't have done it to Rex Tillerson. They wouldn't have done it to James Mattis. They would not have done it to John Kelly. They would not have done it to other members of Donald Trump's cabinet. So Republicans, you can just stop that BS.
Joe Scarborough hyperventilating today, as he is wont to do on Morning Joe. Well, when they're not sucking up to Trump, they're shouting that Trump is about to be impeached. Well, this is where the state of things are right now here in Washington, D.C., where we're broadcasting on the Laura Ingraham Show, 855-40-LAURA. The reporter for the New York Times, Michael Schmidt, he went on MSNBC and under questioning by Willie Geist. Willie Geist asked, well, isn't it also the case that you have no evidence in the leaks that were given to the New York Times that there was any collusion between the Trump administration or Trump campaign and Russia in order to affect the outcome of the election? And he has to admit, yes, you're right. There is no evidence. Then he said, but it all does. No, there's no evidence of that. In fact, the New York Times has to admit there's no evidence that any conversation between Trump associates and Russia. Last time I checked, it wasn't illegal to talk to Russian business interests. None of that is indicated to even have any relation to Trump. But those facts don't matter. They're lost in the ether of the cable chatter. Joining us now, and I'm delighted he's with us, Lieutenant General Keith Boykin is with us now, and he has for years, Jerry Boykin, excuse me, for years he has written about and thought about issues of national security and intelligence, military affairs. He was Undersecretary of Defense for Intel under George W. Bush, and he's now the Executive VP at Family Research Council. And General Boykin, it's great to talk to you. How are you?
I'm doing well, Laura. It's good to be on your program, especially at a critical time like this.
Yes, let's talk about what is really important here. A lot of folks listening across the country are busy people. They're not reading every line of the New York Times, but they maybe turn on television and they see a chyron on CNN that says Trump aides in constant touch with senior Russian officials during campaign. Well, that comes from leaks, and that hardly tells the whole story.
Well, I think it's simply not true. It is just simply not true. If they want to go down the trail of some collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians to interfere in the election and all that, prove it. There's been no evidence, and I do not believe that is the case. it is very clear that Mike Flynn has visited Russia. He's had interest in Russia, but that is a common thing when you have an election. People divest from their holdings that would be a conflict of interest, and the fact that he called between the election and the inauguration that Flynn called the ambassador here, and even talked about sanctions. I'm just not sure, Laura, what the big deal is there. It would seem to me that you'd want to start that relationship before you were actually in the White House and responsible for it. And it sounds to me like that's what he did. What he did wrong was he misled the vice president, and that's unacceptable.
Well, it's not clear to me how Mike Flynn lied. People say Mike Flynn lied. Well, if the question to him was, did you discuss sanctions? And he said, no, we didn't discuss sanctions. And the conversation with the Russian ambassador was, as he has referenced it in an interview with the Daily Caller, it was like a quickie, the ambassador saying, we must discuss sanctions and other and he said, well, in 2 weeks when we're going to be talking about everything. We're going to be reviewing all aspects of our policy. That's not discussing sanctions. That's why they haven't released these intercepts. They haven't released the intercept transcript because I think that ends up, my view is that ends up clearing Mike Flynn. That's my view. I might be wrong, but that's what I think.
And I don't know, and I hope you're right. But here's what's more important to me, is why are they even talking about these intercepts? That's just unheard of.
Well, Joe Scarborough said that's not the story. Joe Scarborough went on a tear this morning saying that anyone who's talking about leaks is obfuscating for the underlying ethical problem and the underlying dysfunction and closeness between Trump and Russia, that the leak thing is a secondary issue.
Yeah, well, I think you don't expect me to agree with Joe Scarborough on probably much of anything, but this is a big story. Why are they discussing the fact that we are monitoring the ambassador's phone calls? First of all, the ambassador assumes that we are, but why are we talking about that openly, and why are we even talking about the contents of that, which would then come full circle and say, no, we have you on tape, General Flynn, of talking about the sanctions. Well, why are we even doing that? Remember, Laura, Mike Flynn was not revered by the intelligence community. He was an innovator. He challenged the intelligence community. He wrote a paper in 2000, I think 10 or 11, saying that you're still using a Cold War paradigm for how we operate in intelligence. You have to change. Then he became the DIA director. He tried to implement major change, and he got fired as a result of it. The community itself has been politicized, the intel community, and I think this is one of the results. This is one of the things that you're seeing come out of that politicization. You're seeing a guy that is key in the Trump administration being targeted, and they've used the tools that they have available to them to bring this guy down. And I think this is a devastating loss to the Trump administration and to the country as a whole.
Well, it's something to hear folks describe Mike Flynn as arrogant, as very prickly with people. They described him in his interview when there was question about this call with Russia, that he became himself like a litigator in his response to the questions, that he was annoyed that he was being asked questions about this. In the long knives I had heard were out for Flynn back in December. And I had heard from people close to the administration that there were folks inside who didn't want him. They didn't want him as national security advisor from the beginning.
Well, I mean, there were a lot of people lined up against him. You know what they were lined up initially against him for? They thought he was going to be the DNI, or the Director of National Intelligence, which would then put all 17 or 16 intelligence agencies under him. So the long knives were out after him. And I think that's one of the reasons that he wound up as the National Security Advisor, because it was kind of clear that they were going to line up against him, and there'd probably be congressional resistance. But the intel community has a great angst against Flynn. Look, he is prickly. But people in those kind of positions
doesn't bother me at all.
You think, Yeah, no, it doesn't bother me either. You think Steve Bannon's not prickly? You think KT's not prickly?
It doesn't bother me. Yeah, people are prickly. Who cares? I'm prickly sometimes. Who cares? I care about competence. Are you good at your job? Can you do your job? And everyone just blithely says, "Oh, he wasn't suited for that job." Well, maybe people didn't like him because he was going to be a reformer inside the intelligence agencies. And it seems to me, given what we're seeing with these leaks, it needs a lot of reforming. It's become politicized. Absolutely. It looks like.
Go back and think of all of the accusations that came out of Central Command, Southern Command, other places about the analytical reports being changed. That what the analysts were saying was never getting to the president because somebody in the middle was changing them. Well, now you've got an intelligence community that has been somewhat discredited under the Obama administration for either not telling the whole truth or just simply not telling the truth at all. And you got a guy like Flynn that comes in that's known to be an innovator, and who they're going to line up against? Trump himself? No, they're going to line up against anybody that he might use to bring them back to where they need to be. Now, I have a great respect for the intel community, but Obama has really had a devastating effect on them, just like he has the military, and he's done it in a variety of ways. So I think Flynn was targeted by them because they were concerned about where Flynn was going to go in terms of what he was going to recommend to President Trump.
And Obama's people really despised him because he was the most vociferous critic on the inside of the Iran deal. Yeah. And they called him anti-Islamist. He was, the left will call him Islamophobic. He was very concerned about the Islamic infiltration of Western society. Clearly, not Muslim, but Islamicized influences in Western society, and they didn't like that either. And so, for a whole variety of reasons, they thought that Flynn was a threat to the old understanding, and he ruffled a lot of feathers, no doubt. And I think he paid for it with these leaks.
I can tell you, Laura, having been working directly for Donald Rumsfeld, that even the Bush administration wanted to go down the path of this is a great religion of peace that's been hijacked by a bunch of radicals. And that's where even Donald Rumsfeld and George Bush took us down that path. And there were many of us who were very frustrated over that. No, this is about the theology of Islam. God bless those that don't subscribe to that. Mike Flynn was one of the first people to come up with a credible voice and say, no. We need to look at what the Quran and the Hadith say. We need to understand that they believe that they are doing exactly what the Quran and Hadith say. He was one of the very first ones, and the intel community has yet to adapt that because the president has not allowed them to. So Mike Flynn is going to force them to do something that they have been reluctant to do, and that the presidents of the United States, the last two, have really not allowed them to do. And that was another reason that Mike Flynn was on the outside looking in.
What do you know about Robert Harward, who is the retired admiral who is at least one of the top choices to replace the Flynn at National Security?
I know Bob, and I've known Bob for a number of years, just like I know Keith Kellogg. In fact, probably I've known Keith Kellogg for 35 years. And they're both good people, very good people. Harwood, I think, has been reported, actually, grew up in Iran for the most part and speaks Farsi. In fact, one time we were talking, and I think he told me he hitchhiked from Iran to Turkey when he was a teenager. So he's been around that part of the world. But more importantly, he's a Navy SEAL that's got a credible track record of combat, and he's also been the deputy commander of the Central Command under Mad Dog Mattis. So they would have a close relationship, and I think that that would be good because I've seen it where the National Security Advisor and Secretary of Defense are at odds, and that's not healthy for the president.
He's at Lockheed Martin. He's one of the top executives at a major defense contractor living in the UAE, I guess, much of the time.
Yeah.
I heard, by the way, last night from someone who should know that Mattis is a Democrat. Is that accurate? Do you know anything about that?
I have no idea whether Mattis is a Democrat or not.
I found that interesting.
I don't, yeah. Well, Flynn's a Democrat.
No, I didn't even know that. I don't think Flynn's a Democrat.
Yeah, Flynn's a Democrat. Flynn's a lifelong Democrat.
Conservative Democrat,
Yeah.
no doubt. But
Yes,
well.
that's correct.
And as we close out this segment, General, there was another general that they quoted today, and forgive me for not remembering who it is. Who again they were talking about on cable news. Who is? I don't know if he's in the Southern Command. Again, forgive me for not remembering his name. Who was on the record saying that we're fighting, we're still fighting a war. And there's a concern about stability in Washington for the military. And so there's one military official on the record as, expressing some concern over the tumult that's siphoned off this Flynn story.
Well, I don't know who that is, Laura, but I can tell you. I mean, this happens all the time in Washington. You've been around long enough to.
It's Tony Thomas,
understand.
General Tony Thomas. That's who it is.
Oh, Tony Thomas. He's the Special Operations Command.
Sorry about that. Yeah, Special Ops Command.
Yeah, commander of the Special Operations Command. And look, you always have some kind of scandal or turmoil in Washington. It's to be expected. I just hope we can get it behind us and get down to the real business of the country here pretty quickly. But somebody asked me, is there a coup going on here? I said, no, this is business as normal in many ways. And what's the lasting effect of this? We'll get a new national security advisor, and probably 6 months from now, people will not even remember that this happened until somebody reminds them on one of the news programs.
Yeah.
So I just don't think that this is a crisis. This is not a national crisis, but it is a significant issue for those of us who like Flynn and have served with him.
Yeah, General Jerry Boykin, it's great to talk to you. Thank you so much for your insights here. We'll check back with you soon. We'll close out this hour on the Laura Ingraham Show. A lot more coming up. What are your kids learning in their sex ed classes in public schools and private schools? You'll find out coming up. Also, my Hit on Special Report is on our Facebook page. Make sure to check it out and all through the day at lifezet.com.